you all can understand them. I'm just kidding. It's good to see you this morning. And I will try and slow down enough that you can keep up with me, because I'm often told that when I'm back home in Scotland, I'm a wee bit fast and very few people understand what I'm saying, so I'll slow it right down as best I can. Did that on purpose. And Richard's not here to translate for me either. So you'll be glad. Anyway, I hope he does. Richard, if you're watching, I hope you feel better soon. Hopefully see him maybe later if he's up for it. This is Scotland. And I try and give some context. I may have done this last time, but you've invited me back, so I guess it's okay to do it again if I did. So in Scotland, it's a relatively small country. It's kind of long and narrow. So Cumbernauld is basically in the heart of it. That's it here, up in the centre next to Glasgow. And just to give you some context of the population, the whole population of Scotland is about 5.25 million people. I think that's about the same as Alabama, give or take, roughly about the same. And half of them live around central Scotland, this little belt here. And in that area, Cumbernauld, Glasgow, down to East Kilbride on the other side, that's about 20 miles north to south, 40 miles east to west. 2.5 million people live in that metropolis. So that's where the bulk of half the population live. And if you're going north out of Glasgow, you have to go through Cumbernauld. And if you're going south to Glasgow, you have to go through Cumbernauld. And we've recently bought some land. I'll introduce you to that later on in the show and tell you a little bit more about that. And I may have mentioned it last time I was here, because that happened about 5 years ago, and we've got some updates on it. And there are 20 churches of Christ around Scotland. Some of them have 3 people who are meeting together and being faithful to the Lord. Ours is one of the larger congregations. If we had everyone on a Sunday morning, including our youth who come on Sundays, we'd have about 86. And we've been very blessed in the last couple of years, actually, to have some families come and place membership with us, plus some baptisms, and I'll introduce you to some of them as we go through this. When you're in Scotland, when you're in Cumbernauld and you want to go to the sea, you can be there in about 45 minutes. Pretty much, you go in east or west. So to give you a little bit more context, if you were to take the north coast of Scotland, and I'm going to concentrate on this one, so if you can creak your necks over here, that would be the Tennessee state line if I took Scotland and dropped it right in to the state of Alabama. And the bottom part of Scotland, so you've got the unmentionable neighbour down here, and we've got the south coast here. If you were to take that and drop that in, that would be Gulf Shores, Mobile, Gulf Shores, that area. Okay? And if you're an Auburn fan, it would be out here somewhere in the middle of the sea. All right? So I apologise if you're an Auburn fan. If you're an Alabama fan, you've survived. Let's leave it at that. Or Scotland landed on you. Maybe that's the other way to look at it as well. So that gives you an idea of the country. Narrow, but long. Okay? So north to south, quite big. Otherwise, not so much. And then you get the islands and the highlands. And we all speak English in Scotland, although technically we speak Scots, which is English, but harder to understand when we speak it. And if you want to speak Gaelic, you're going to have to go up to the islands or talk to my wife, who speaks Gaelic. And she'll tell you how Gaelic works. And I said I'd stand back here for the benefit of those that need this little thing. But if you want to know Gaelic, you can ask my wife, and she can explain to you why the letters in the English alphabet do not get pronounced the same way in Gaelic as we pronounce them. So you'll read a word in Gaelic and think you know how to pronounce it. You're wrong. And you can ask her about it, because I don't know. I haven't got a clue about it. I'm learning Spanish because that's a lot easier than my own language. But anyway. So that's Cumbernauld, about 20 congregations. We have the benefit geographically of being very central in Scotland, because everything kind of revolves around that community. All the major, you've got I-59, you've got I-20, you've got I-65 that all kind of converge in Birmingham. And Cumbernaulds like that. We've got the M8, the M80, the M73, the M74. There's only one motorway or interstate in Scotland that doesn't go near Cumbernauld over on the east coast. But everything else is there. If you want to go from Glasgow to Edinburgh, you go through Cumbernauld. That's the capital, Edinburgh, and the major city. So it has those kind of advantages. And the land that we bought is right on the interstate. And the plan's to put a nice big sign, says Church of Christ, up there. And it'll not only benefit us, it'll benefit, we think, all the churches of Christ in Scotland, because 80,000 cars go by it every single day. I think it's actually more than that, but they say it's 80,000. But that's probably just because the others give up and turn back because of traffic. Anyway, oh, you don't want to see him. But that's my wife. We had our 27th wedding anniversary on Friday. So I tell myself that we're very happily married. Please don't ask her if that's the case or not, you know. So she looks after me, and I'm very proud to have her. It was taken a few years ago. And this is our congregation, for the most part. One of the things that we do every year in November is we take what we call a congregational retreat. Maybe you've done the same sort of thing. Maybe you've had an elders retreat or a deacons retreat, things like that. And we go up into the Highlands, we rent a hostel, we stay there for a couple of nights. We sing, we pray, we praise God in various ways, through the ways that are ordained. We break bread on the first day of the week, and we just encourage one another. And of course we eat, because that's just the way we do it amongst God's people. It's part of our fellowship. And some of these people I will introduce you to a little bit more. I'll mention a couple of people very quickly. This lady over here is Kim, and that's her husband Pete. They're from, well, Pete is originally from England, but he wanted to do better, so he moved to Scotland. I think you can understand that. So he now lives up here. They came up here, and the day they arrived, or I think the weekend they arrived, the lockdown had begun. And so we didn't see them in person for months, because in Scotland, the lockdown restrictions during the COVID pandemic were very severe. So you weren't allowed to go out your house. If you went out, you had to go by yourself to the shops, to the stores, to grocery shop, and then you had to leave immediately. Or you could go out and walk the dog, and you had to be back in the house for 30 minutes. And if you were out for any other reason, you could be arrested for breach of the rules. So they made it legislation. It was a bit challenging. So the congregation for 2 years went on Zoom. We came back into the building. We had to go back onto Zoom. We came back into the building. And gradually this year, we've reintroduced everything. So back in April, we reintroduced our evening worship services. And then in August, we were able to restart all our youth work and Bible classes. Initially in the building, but also in the school. And I'll talk a little bit more about the school and the work that we do there as we go through this. And our congregation, if you can make that out there, is very variegated. So we have Filipinos in our congregation. We have a Pakistani who is married to a Zimbabwean. We have a Gambian who is married to a Pole, from Poland, obviously. We have people from Liberia. I always have to remember these ones. Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria. We also have a young lady who has come from eastern Ukraine. She and her mother set out from Kramatorsk as the Russians were advancing in Ukraine several months ago. And they made the arduous journey across Ukraine during the war. They made it to Moldova, which is the border between Ukraine and Romania. And when they got into Romania, they found a missionary family from the Lord's Church who were working there and had opened up their home for the benefit of refugees who were pouring out of Ukraine. And they offered them safe refuge, shelter, food, and gospel. And Hannah got to hear the gospel for the first time as Christ intended it. And she was baptized. And it took her family, she and her mother, another few weeks. They stayed there for 3 weeks. They were only there for a couple of days. They ended up staying 3 weeks. They made their way across Europe. 3,000 miles they drove, till eventually they came to Glasgow, where they now live. And the preacher who had baptized Hannah got in touch with a preacher in Warsaw, Poland, who knew Paulina, one of our ladies. Now, she's up there. She's over here somewhere. Where is she? Help me out, Beth. She's up there. She is. That's Paulina, and she's from Poland. And she and her husband had moved to Scotland. He needed to get work. He's African. Poland can be quite racist to non-Poles, but particularly those from Africa. And he couldn't get work. So they moved to Scotland. They knew we have a mutual contact through the congregation in Warsaw. And they came and placed membership with us. She picked up Hannah. Hannah's been with us every week since then. Most of the time she's there, and recently got her own apartment provided to her as a refugee, and trying to make a new life. And they are not going back to Kramatorsk. That's in the Donetsk region, which is largely under Russian occupation or bombardment. So they have got no plans to go back. Apparently everything that they had has been destroyed. We also have an American in the congregation, but he's from Cincinnati. So that really makes him a Yankee. But if you were here for the lesson this morning, you know that we have to love our enemies and forgive them. And that's true of us because we have several Englishmen in our congregation. And you talk about enemies, we call them the old enemy, but we've got a couple in there. And we might get to meet one or two of them as we go through. Pete's one of them. Dick is another. I think we actually have another one. And there's this lad as well I'll mention. I keep wanting to point at that one. This lad here, his name is Scott. And he's from Sunderland in the northeast of England. Nice fellow. He's in the army. And he's dating one of our young ladies. That's Nicole, my co-worker's daughter. That's her. And that's Melanie there trying to hide. And Adam's right there. That's my co-worker. And he and I worked with Richard back in 2005. Scott is in the British Army. He's a lifer. He's in for 22 years, and he's most of his way through that. I think he's done 15. And he's done 6 tours of duty in Afghanistan. He served, I think, in Iraq as well, and amongst other dispatches. And he's been involved in working and training troops from other armies and helping with, in various ways, the war in the east that the Ukrainians are fighting. He started dating Nicole, but Nicole is a very faithful Christian and will only marry a Christian. And he said he's an atheist. She's persuaded him he's an agnostic. And hopefully we can get a study going with Scott and get talking to him. So do keep him in your prayers as we try and work with him. And I'll introduce you to Tristan that I mentioned in my sermon this morning in just a little while. Before COVID struck, we had about 40 in our youth group on a Tuesday night, and about 15 to 20 teenagers maximum, and they kind of rotated out. Some didn't come every week. So we had a core group, and others kind of came in and came occasionally or whatever. But we had about 20 on the roll in that Tuesday night group. And then COVID struck, and we quickly found out we did a lot of stuff on Zoom. So we had our worship on Zoom on a Sunday. At night, one of the men told bedtime stories for the kids. Monday, the ladies would have a prayer meeting. Tuesday, one of the men would teach cooking with a Filipino. He's a chef, professional chef, so he used his talents there. In the afternoon, we had a Bible study. In the evening, we had a quiz. On a Wednesday, we'd have another Bible study. We'd maybe do something on the Wednesday night if there was time. On a Thursday, we had an open session on a Wednesday just for a chat. On a Thursday, we'd have cooking with a Filipino. Then we'd have Sugarloaf Fountain, where one of the Filipinos, another one, was teaching us how to bake and ice, and that's why I'm the size I am now. I was never this size when I was that age, but anyway, it shows you get into the pulpit and you carry a lot of weight with you. That's kind of what, but don't let it put you off. Be a preacher. And then on Fridays, we'd have stuff that was going on. Saturday, there'd be stuff. So every day Zoom was being used. We tried to keep all our people together, our young people and our old ones, but then we found out that all the young people were doing Zoom for their classes because the schools were all closed for about 2 years. And so the kids heard Zoom and thought, geography, biology, arithmetic, mathematics. So they didn't want to do it. And so we had to build it up. So when the school opened in August, we couldn't use the school. And we have to use the school because our own facility is inadequate for the numbers that we were having. So when we opened it, we only had a few kids coming. We've gradually built it back up. And we're doing a lot more work now, not only with the children in the community, but with children from other congregations. Because a lot of congregations only have one family with kids in them. And they've got no contact during the week with other children who are in the church. So they've started coming to our Tuesday night work. And they're involved with either our teenagers or our younger kids. And there's a couple of them up there, and I'll introduce you to them as we go on. And some of our volunteers and workers in the congregation. And you don't have, what we say in Cumbernauld, you don't have to be crazy to work there, but it helps. And I think Richard was about as crazy as we could handle, but there you go. We miss you, Richard. We love you. One of the benefits we had in our building, and I'll tell you a little bit about this. 5 years ago, we were given the opportunity to buy land. So Adam and I came over to the United States. We tag teamed. Adam came for a month. We met at the airport. He flew home. I carried on the work. We did that for several months, so that there was always one of us back in Scotland, and one of us here trying to raise the funds. I'll show you the building and what that entailed later. We got an email from a local authority asking us if we would be interested in renting some office space free of charge. It turns out we have to pay for it, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. So we thought, yeah, that'd be great. Maybe we could use that. Nice wee office for Adam and I. And we're in the town centre in the main shopping mall. People could come in and say hello, and maybe we get some studies going or have a neutral place where we could do a Bible study and meet with people in the community. And Adam went up. I'd just gone over to the States. He decided to go along, and they showed us this incredible, huge office space. It's big enough that we could set up for worship and fellowship without dismantling. We always had to do one thing or the other. So on Sunday morning in our old building, we'd have all the chairs out for worship. Then all the chairs, the young guys would come up, they'd stack all the chairs up, bring out the tables, set up the tables, bring all the chairs back out. This is your job. So you got to look forward to. And then we'd have dinner, and then we'd clean up and put everything away and put it back up for worship again for later. This place, we didn't have to do that. And the benefit that that brought to us was when COVID came, we had these regulations about staying 6 feet apart. And this building meant that everybody could still come and be 6 feet away from other bubbles. And so we could observe the rules, the laws that were in place, and be an encouragement to one another. And this was us restarting our Sunday evening worship back in April of this year. And we had a good time. It was nice to get back together. And it's kind of interesting the anxiety that people had about coming back together again. Because after 2 years of isolation, people weren't used to being around one another. So it was a good way of reintroducing them and getting them used to it. And Cumbernauld a congregation that very much cares about each other. This individual is Dick. And Dick was an elder in the congregation where I began preaching over 30 years ago. And about 30 years ago, he was appointed as an elder. A few years later, I'd moved to Cumbernauld. He and his family moved to the church in Stirling, 20 miles north of where we are in Cumbernauld. He served as an elder there. Recently, in the last couple of years, the eldership dissolved because of death and ill health. And Dick and his family decided to move into another area, and Cumbernauld was the congregation that was nearest to them and suited them, and he became a member. And Dick and his family have always been a great encouragement to me. His wife, Anne, has disability issues, mobility issues, and so he does a lot looking after her. He has heart disease, but they live with their daughter and her family. This is their granddaughter, Anna Rose. And if you ever meet Anna Rose, the hyphen is very important. Just saying. She'll let you know if you don't say it when you say her name. She can tell. This lady here is Moira. Now, I mentioned Kim, who's married to the Englishman. Keep up with me now. And Moira is in her early 80s. I don't know. My wife doesn't know either. I don't know why I'm looking at her. Just trying to make sure that it's her fault that I don't remember this than mine. But Moira and Kim thought they were Christians. And after coming along and worshiping, Pete's a faithful member of the church. His father was in the church. His grandfather was in the church. One of those rarities in the United Kingdom where there's a line of family that's in the congregation. And they'd moved to Scotland, and they thought they were Christians. And they heard the preaching, and they started asking some questions about some of the things we were teaching. We got to studying with them, and they realized they hadn't obeyed the gospel. And back in June, Moira and her daughter were baptized. But Moira has profound health issues. She's had cancer, she's had strokes, she's disabled, wheelchair-bound, often housebound if her health's particularly bad, as it has been the past few weeks. And we couldn't get her into the baptistry. We didn't even have one because we couldn't fit it into the building, couldn't get it up the stairs. So we usually go to another congregation and borrow their baptistry when we do a baptism. But there was no way she was going to get in, and she was a bit scared of water. So we contacted the local authority. The county had swimming pools, and they had a hoist. And they graciously said, yeah, you can come a bit earlier before we open, and you can baptize her. So we put her on a chair, they hoisted her out into the water, we lowered her into the water, and her son-in-law baptized both his wife and his mother-in-law into Christ. And it was a touching and exciting time for them back in June to do that. The other ladies there's Leanne in the background, and Nicola, who's one of our members. And Richard will know Nicola. Her father was Jack Strachan, who passed away 4 years ago. and the preacher that baptized both Adam and I and encouraged us to preach the gospel. We have a congregation from the youngest to the oldest. This is our youngest person that comes to church. This is that's the one on the left, by the way, just in case you were wondering. That's Elise. She was born last year. And on the right is Ivan, one of the young Ghanaian boys. He has 2 older brothers. And I'll introduce you to his brother Edwin in a minute. We're very proud of Ivan. He's 19. He's in his 3rd year, I believe, at university. And he's doing medical research and that kind of stuff. And that was at the congregational retreat. And they get involved with everybody. It doesn't matter. They don't have the cliques. Everybody's involved with everyone else. In fact, the worst people in our youth group are those that are 90 and above. Because they think they're in the youth group at times. And they certainly behave like kids at times. No 2 ways about it. But enough about that. And we do a lot of service in the community in Cumbernauld. In June, the town has an annual gala day. They do all sorts of different stuff. There's activities, there's face painting, there's charity works going on. And they ask us to do the barbecue. And I always have to say this, because on this trip I've been told that what I've been calling a barbecue isn't actually a barbecue. So when I say barbecue, I mean man, fire, food. That's a barbecue. Yeah? And have you ever noticed the magnetic qualities of those things? You know, if you're ever having a garden thing in your house and you get your friends over and there's that grill and all the, you always find your husband because he's always standing near. It doesn't matter whether or not you're doing the cooking or whatever. Your husband will have gravitated towards the fire. Men make fire, fire make food. That's the only time you ever see us. That's as close as we like to get to the kitchen, I think. So they asked us to do it. And it was June, so, June's going to be great. It's going to be warm. It's going to be sunny. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be wonderful weather. So that's why we put up a tent to keep the rain off. But the tent didn't do us any good because the rain in Scotland in June comes in horizontally, not vertically. So really what we needed was a windbreaker because the rain was just miserable. And the winds were 50 miles an hour on that day. Now in Scotland, we call that a breeze. In St. Petersburg, they close the bridge when it gets that bad. But in Scotland, that's just a breeze. In Scotland, if the wind was going to stop you from doing anything, you'd do nothing. Even Oklahoma admires the strength of our wind. This is Beth's sister, Pauline. And all the work that we were doing that day was just to make a difference in the community, to get to know the community, to introduce ourselves to the community, and who knows, maybe get a conversation going with the community. You can see Adam, just about make him out here. That's him there, holding on to the gazebo because the wind's blowing at 50 miles an hour. We had to put that in high-speed shutter because otherwise you wouldn't be able to focus on the tent. But anyway, and we raised over £366 that day and gave all the proceeds to a local charity. This is Linda. I keep pointing at that one. You can't see if I point now. This is Linda in the middle and her son. It's either Scott or Paul. There's 3 of them. And I always get them mixed up. I think that's Scott, but it might be Paul. If you meet him, you can ask him. And they had a brother, Tony, who committed suicide 2 years ago. A young man, just in his 20s, took his own life. And a friend of mine who's a mental health nurse says suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It's important to talk to people. So Tony's Safe Place was set up by his family to help people, especially young men, to come in a safe environment and open up about what's troubling them and try and guide them away from making a terrible decision. And sometimes people feel very trapped. And the role that each of us plays as members of the church is very important to help people understand that they are loved and accepted and wanted by God. And those are very important lessons for those that are going through mental health struggles. And I don't know about here in the United States, but certainly in Scotland, mental health issues have shot up tremendously, even within congregations. So some of our ministry is now just helping people get used to the daily routine of life and removing some of the fear of COVID and some of the other anxieties that came along with lockdowns and isolation and such like. So we're able to do that. And one of the reasons we wanted to do it is Tony, Paul, and Scott, and Denise, the sister, who's our neighbour. She only lives 4 doors along from us. were all members of our youth group on a Tuesday night. They came along Tuesday nights back in the 90s. Denise, maybe her brothers, came along to Camp Heatherbell, which we run in July. And Richard was there back in 2005 when we had it up in the Highlands. And we had a connection with that family. But a lot of those connections get lost for a variety of reasons. And sometimes there are reconnections, even in the most adverse of circumstances. And we're there to serve, and we're there to help and make a difference. But ultimately, the work of the church is always about preaching and teaching. It's one thing to meet people. It's one thing to talk to people. But ultimately, what we want to do is talk to people about Jesus. Talk to them about their faith and their relationship with God. I said this morning that some people might say, is my good enough for God? Well, being a good person is a good thing. But what do we do about our sin? And that's why God sent Jesus. God sent Jesus because none of us can take care of our sin. And preaching and teaching is about emphasizing that, about reminding people how much they need a Savior. I mentioned Ivan earlier. Ivan is one of our young men of God. We do a thing in the spring called Young Men of God. Over 2 nights, we have young men from 16 and up, younger if they want, as long as they're members of the church, and they get the chance to preach the gospel at a gospel meeting. So we have 2 lessons on a Sunday night, 2 lessons on a Monday night. During the Zoom thing, we did it online. This year we had some of the speakers in the building, 2 of them, and the others were online because they were down in England and speaking for us. One of the men that spoke this year is this fellow, Ivan's older brother, Edwin. Edwin's 23 and single, just saying. And he's studying to be a doctor. Can't be bad, right? Am I right? And he's not bad looking as well, I'm told. I don't know. I don't see it, but there you go. Anyway, what a preacher this guy is. In fact, in a sense, what a loss to the pulpit that he doesn't want to be a full-time preacher. But he wants to preach, but he also wants to be a pediatrician. So he's going through his medical exams to get into medical school next year. And Edwin and his brother, Edwin now teaches classes. He teaches the teenagers and the younger kids from about 6th grade and upwards. You would love Edwin as a teacher. You really would. You'd be very, very impressed. He's a very good teacher. He preaches on a regular basis. He song leads. He leads prayers. He'll do Lord's Supper. Usually takes him 15 to 20 minutes to say his piece about the Lord. You don't get 1 sermon in Cumbernauld. You get 3. You get a sermon. You get a sermon for the Lord's Supper, and you get a sermon for the offering. So if you come to visit us, bring a packed lunch. I think that's maybe the best advice I can give you. But we do. We throw a lot into our worship of God. And of course, that time of remembrance of Jesus is why we're together on the first day of the week, isn't it? And how important it is to remember that. So we're very proud of him. And this is the man that's the reason he's the man he is. This is his dad, Paul. They're a Ghanaian family. Paul is a cardiothoracic nurse and does a lot of work with regard to stents and stuff like that in the hospital surgery theatre. But Paul's a preacher. And he's a full-time nurse. But in Ghana, he's a full-time preacher. And he does that through YouTube by doing lessons online. In fact, this morning I got a link from him for his lesson this week. I think it was about this doing remembrance of me. It was about the Lord's Supper, part 2. And he does that every week. His family get together. They sing to the camera. And then he preaches. They all step away. And he preaches his lesson. And he's greatly respected in Ghana. And he and his oldest son and wife are planning to return to Ghana in the next 2 years. But Edwin and Ivan, they're staying in Scotland because it's all they've ever known. They don't remember Ghana. And they've rarely visited it, so they want to stay in Scotland. But a tremendous man. And this young fellow in the background, you can't see her, but that's Anne. I mentioned Dick, that's his wife. Now, you're going to tell her I said this, but that's her best side. Anyway, that's their grandson, Cameron. Now, this is where it gets depressing. Richard, you've got this to look forward to. Cameron is the age his dad was when he was in my youth group when I became a Christian. And now his son, Cameron, is in my youth group. That just makes you feel old. And his mother is the age Cameron is when she was in my youth group when I started preaching. So as though it wasn't bad enough having one of them, I've got 2 of them. but we're very proud of them. And that's David, who was like Cameron 34 years ago. Aye, how they change, give or take anyway. And a very fine young man. He preaches, he teaches. If you think I'm fast, good luck with David. He can do a 45-minute sermon in 12 minutes. He really is fast. You don't want to see that guy. I don't know why that's in there, but anyway. And this is our teens. We have this room in our facility that we give over just to the teenagers. We use it for other things, of course, but it is there for the teenagers. And I'm going to point out some of the people that we're working with. So the picture might not be the best, but let's see who we've got here. So at the back we've got, let's see, is that working? I think it stopped working. Isn't it? Oh, no, it's up there. There it is. So there's Abigail. She comes from the Stirling Church. There's Georgia. She comes from the Falkirk Church. There's Noria. She comes from the Denny Lonehead Church. And we have another young boy in the other group that's at the school who comes from the church in Castlemilk, Glasgow. And I don't think I've got any photographs of him. These are often the only kids in their congregation. And so they come to Cumbernauld so they've got contact with other kids who love God, who want to learn about God, and want to be encouraged by other people who have the same faith or are learning the same faith. And that's so important. And it's important to remember that in a congregation, even this size, or a small congregation like us, it's not about groups. We have teenagers, we have kids, we have teenagers, we have young adults, we have young families, we have families, and we have pensioners, if you will. We have our silver surfers, or whatever you call them. Anyway, we've got all our different age groups, but we're all the same. It doesn't matter. Every day is a new day for us as a Christian. Physically, we might not feel the same, but spiritually, how should we be any different? And so being around young people or old people is good in so many ways. The older people feel invigorated by being around the young people. The young people get the benefit of wisdom. So it's important for all of us to play our part in building up the church and not just rely on others to do that. And half of the people you're looking at in that youth group have no contact with the church except on a Tuesday night. They have no family in the church, no encouragement at home to go to church. Just happy for them to go out the house and do those things. And back in January, we had a first baptism. You can't really see him, but that's Finlay. And over here's Cameron that I mentioned earlier. Finlay's the younger brother. Finlay got baptized in January in Scotland. And he said to his dad he wanted to get baptized. David said to him, let's sit down and talk about it. They sat down, right, okay, you understand what you need to do, you're ready. We'll go to East Kilbride or Livingston. Where would you rather go to get baptized? And he says, no, Dad, I want to get baptized in the loch. Or a lake, as you might say here, but that wouldn't be right. It's a loch. We call it that in Scotland. And when you get baptized in a loch in Scotland, you never come back and ask to get it done again. You don't want to do that again. And his dad said, oh, that's great, son. You should ask your grandfather about that. So he went and asked Dick, and Dick baptized him. And then in the summer, Cameron, at the end of camp, said he wanted to talk to his grandfather about getting baptized. 2 days later, before they broke bread, Cameron put on Christ. But he did it in France in July. So he's a bit smarter. He's not going to do that in January in Scotland. I'll wait till I get to France, I guess was his plan. But anyway, we're just thrilled for the family. Anna Rose is still 8 years old, so she's not quite ready to make that decision, but she's growing up amongst it and learning it. This is our class at the school. And I mentioned Georgia. This is Alex, her sister. Caleb is one of our young boys. And Aaliyah from the Stirling Church. And all the other kids there are from the community. I'll mention this. The school that they go to, homeschooling is becoming more common. I don't say common, but it's not very common at all. Certainly not as it compares to here in the south. But in the United Kingdom, homeschooling's starting to gather a little bit of pace, but most kids go to regular school. The school that we have to rent, it's the only one that's available to us, Cumbernauld Academy, is the gay flagship. It's the LGBT flagship of their high schools. So if kids feel inclined towards that particular lifestyle, they might want to go to this school, and they'll be helped to go to that school and maybe even transported to go to that school. When you go into the school, it's all rainbow flags. Mr. and Mr. Prom King and things like that. And some of the kids we are working with have told us, and they're only like 7th grade, they've told us that a couple of the girls have said that they've got girlfriends. Couple of the girls that we've worked with and are working with will talk about their mums who are raising them. These are some of the challenges that young people are facing. They're having this thrust upon them. When we talk about conservative in Scotland, we don't mean conservative as you would understand it. Boris Johnson, former leader of the Conservative Party, Rishi Sunak, current leader of the Conservative Party, they're not conservative. Maybe fiscally, and even then over the last couple of years they're not that. But when it comes to making a decision on your politicians for who stands for biblical values, there are none. All of the parties fully support gay marriage, LGBT, transgender, divorce, abortion, even euthanasia, which is going through the Parliament just now. So the work of the church is even more important than it's ever been. It's always been important. But the work that we're doing is affecting the lives of young people. And the work that the government is doing is impacting them in a terrible way. So we're trying to offer them something better. And we try not to be judgmental. We're not judgmental. We work hard. We love these kids. We just want them to know Jesus. Because if they can fall in love with Jesus, they'll choose to do the things that make him happy, that please him. And that's what we emphasize in our work. Because if you love the head, you're going to fall in love with the body, and how important that is for every one of us. So we work a lot for our young people, and we do a lot for them. Back in August, we got together, our staff, so to speak. We don't have staff, but these are our volunteers. Adam and I are supported by congregations in the States. Everyone else there just volunteers. I mentioned cooking with a Filipino. That's him, right? Is this? Does this stop working again? Oh, there it is. That's him. There he is, right there. That's Paolo, and Paolo wants to be a preacher, but he works as a chef. He often does double shifts. We don't get to see him as much as we would like, and certainly not as much as he would like. And we've got members of the congregation teaching all our classes in various ways, and Adam and I will do the bulk of the work on Thursdays, Tuesdays as well. We teach 3 times a week usually. Maybe we'll get a Thursday off if the other one's teaching, because we only have one adult class. And we do that on Thursdays because we do youth work Tuesdays, adult work Thursdays, because if we didn't, there wouldn't be many adults in the class because they're all working with our young people on Tuesdays. So we have separate nights for our Bible classes just to make sure everyone gets a chance to be fed. And back in September, we had a group of friends over from the United States, part of the Ministry League, if you're wondering what the ML stands for. And there we're promoting Exposure Youth Camp, which is going to be in Huntsville in 2 weeks, I believe. Yeah, 27th it starts. Not far from here. Maybe some of your people are going to be going to that. And they had 3,000 there, but they would like to see it in Scotland. So they came over and they met. In this case, they were meeting with brethren in the church in Kirkcaldy. And there's a guy there from the church in Livingston as well to hear what they're doing. Kirkcaldy is the oldest continuous meeting congregation in Scotland. Brethren there began the journey of restoration in 1783. That's the year that Britain formally recognized the United States of America as a sovereign nation, 2 years after Yorktown. So it's fascinating to see, and they arrived at that because they just studied the Bible. And then you've got Campbell and Stone and O'Kelly and the others of the Restoration Movement, the Cane Ridge Revival. Richard's dad will come down and tell you all about that if you're interested, and you can learn more. And this was up in the Highlands. This was back in September, and yes, it really was that cold. But there was almost blue sky, so it made it a wonderful day in Scotland. And we've got this piece of land that we've bought. If you didn't get this story last time, I will share it again. This is 3 1/3 acres located right next to the interstate. I think you own the land. Is it Deerfoot Parkway? I think it's where you've got it, and I believe it's right on the main thoroughfare. I'm not sure. I think it's called Deerfoot Parkway, so I'm guessing it is. Ours is on the second busiest road in Scotland, right on it. It actually stops the hard shoulder of the motorway of the interstate. The guy wanted £3 1/3 million for it, and we ended up paying £288,000 for it because God got involved. And there was he gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, I guess you could say. And we bought this land, and we've got plans to put a building on it. We want to open it up to the public 7 days a week. Yes, it will serve our spiritual needs. Yes, we'll worship there. Yes, we'll do our youth work there. But we want to meet people by making this available to the community. So we're hoping other charitable groups can benefit from it, and so we can spread the gospel by talking to them. And the plans will be submitted by the end of March with all the various bits and pieces that need to be done with regard to surveys. There's about $60,000 worth of surveys to be done. And this is just the concept at the moment. It depends on what it's going to cost and what we can raise. God's already decided what we're going to build. We just have to figure it out for ourselves with a little bit of guidance through the architect. We had 4 baptisms this year in Cumbernauld. There's been a number of baptisms throughout the United Kingdom. Congregation has raised its support to £100 a week, which now is about $200. It works about $260. The dollar rate has improved if you're British coming to America, and got a little bit poorer if you're the other way around. But anyway, and we're very active. We have a radio station that we broadcast through the internet. We work with Truth FM. We were part of the GBN group, or connected to them in some way. And we're just trying to get the gospel out there to as many people. And here's the thing to remember, and I've said this, Dale Jenkins shared this with me. Everybody has the right to hear the gospel once before others get to hear it a second time. And that's the work in Scotland. There are only 20 congregations, but we're already trying to plant a congregation in the next town. We already got a church planted in Perth. Unfortunately, it's fallen by the wayside, and that work is now ended. So we're doing something a lot closer where those people can come and be part of Cumbernauld and worship with Cumbernauld and get the encouragement from Cumbernauld. But then as the numbers build up, we plant them back in Airdrie. And one of our families, one of our South African families, they are very involved, and they want to be involved in evangelism. They want to bring the gospel to their community. And they're opening up their house, and Beth and I go there on Wednesdays, and we're teaching and we're meeting with people, and we're trying to encourage others to take on Christ as their Lord and Savior. David Livingston grew up in a town just a few miles from where I grew up, in Blantyre. He went to Africa. They made a movie about him. I forget who played him, but Spencer Tracy played Stanley, who was sent by the New York, was one of the American newspapers to find him. Dr. Livingston, I presume, was the famous line. But he's only reported to have saved one person, or at least preached to one person according to the Presbyterian tradition. But he said, Christ alone can save the world, but Christ cannot save the world alone. We are his hands that wash feet. We are his feet that bring good news of glad tidings. We are his eyes that see the need of others and feel the compassion that he feels. We are the mouth that declares forth the mind of God and makes others known. That's our role. Not just the preacher. That's our role. It's our role in Scotland. It's our role in Pinson, Trussville, and the greater Birmingham area, is to introduce people to Jesus. We do that by becoming him. We do that by serving him. We do that by loving him. And that's their work in a nutshell, I guess I could say, in Cumbernauld. We have people that love Christ, and they love him because of you. Because without your support, without your encouragement, without your forbearance with our work, some of those people would never have heard of Christ. I would still preach, but I don't know who I would reach. And I know you're involved in many works, and I know you do many works all over the world. Wherever they are, whatever you're doing, it is making a difference. God does amazing things, not just with the lives of those that he sends, but with the lives of those who help do the sending. So on behalf of the church in Cumbernauld, the people of Cumbernauld and of Scotland, thank you for supporting us and being part of our work, because we're continuing to introduce people to Christ and see them put him on in baptism. Thank you for your time this morning. God bless you.